Our men live in a closet, a very narrow one. From a very young age, we carve our boys into the man box. They pass from being exuberant and sensitive kids to becoming teenagers wearing a mask. And this man box tells them what to do and what not to do. It tells them that they should not have long hair, they should not play with dolls, they should not wear bright colors, they should especially not show fear, show weakness, they should not be soft, or they should not cry. But they should be strong, they should be athletic and play sports, they should be competitive, they should be sexually active, they should be dominant, aggressive, tough, stoic. They should be protectors who actually know what to do and don't need the help of others. A facade of emotional toughness. I remember this quote from Disraeli that my father used to love, which says, "Never explain, never complain." But is that even possible? Because this man box is actually mutilating our men. It is a huge pressure from either other men or even some women. Pressure of jokes, of bullying, of sometimes even violence to conform, to fit in, and to mutilate our emotional self. So this man box is hurting us all. It's hurting men so much that they actually first harm themselves. The anxiety of the pressure of proving constantly your masculinity, proving that you're up to the level of the man box, is such a pressure on men that they repress their emotions, they repress their anger and their rage at having to perform all the time. And it can explode at any time like a pressure cooker. So men actually have higher suicide rates than women. They have strong rates of depression, of alcoholism, of drug addiction. They have higher rates of school dropout. And all this is actually harming them. But they also harm others because of this anger and this pressure cooker inside. Men are actually have a way higher risk of imprisonment than women. They commit more crimes. They commit 100% of the rapes, 98% of the mass shooting, and there's obviously the huge impact on domestic violence. But for me, the most worrying fact is that the man box is actually making men feel more lonely. When we know that the Harvard study, the longest Harvard study in history, has actually shown that the thing that matters at the end of the day is the quality of our relationship, well, we actually teach the opposite to our boys and our men. We teach them emotional toughness instead of emotional literacy. We portray the ideal man as being alone and being emotionally avoidant. Just think about the iconic man in the media. Just think about the movies. Think about John Wayne or James Bond. Yes, they have a lot of partners. They're sexually very active. They're very seductive. They're very brave. But they're also extremely lonely at the end of the day. And we never talk about that part. When the camera shuts down, what happens? What happens at the end of the day? And this loneliness comes from the emotional disconnection that we foster in our men. The ideal man is seductive but emotionally avoidant. And when women are actually seeking emotional connection, what they face is distance or even sometimes abuse. So this means that this isolation, which is both physical and emotional, is leaving our men alone in their man box. Physical because now, since the 19th century, homosexuality has become from a practice to an identity. And since the 20th century, and especially the 50s, it's been pathologized so badly that the homophobia is so strong that in many places it's very taboo for men to hug themselves or to touch themselves between friends, as we do between women, for fear of being labeled as gay. So we prefer to be physically isolated than to be labeled gay. And emotionally, we also prefer to be labeled emotionally avoidant or distant. That's the right way to be a man. So imagine, at the end of the day, the impact in terms of depression, the impact especially in the middle age of different studies showing that all men feel lonely. Are we okay with this? Are we okay with educating our men to lack empathy when it's actually one of the most important leadership skills of the future? Are we okay with a culture that is praising men who are immature, who are narcissistic, who are egocentric? Because our men, but also our women and children, are suffering for the lack of satisfying relationships. They're suffering from the emotional withdrawal and even the abuse. So this is contributing to our mutual unhappiness. And the worst part is that men actually don't necessarily want to be patriarchs, but they just don't see another model out there. So they tag along. They silently support the status quo. Men are not naturally violent, but they are taught to be by a culture of domination which is actually attacking their own self-esteem. So we need a new kind of man. We need to reframe the traditional notion of masculinity. We need to have men finally standing up and challenging the patriarchy, and not for women, but for themselves. Because as Bell Hooks says, we cannot journey long if we don't bring men with us. So what can we do to actually get out of the man box? Well, different things. The first thing is that we have to learn about it. We have to know more about it. This conversation that we're having is still a minority, marginal. So we need to read books about it. For example, books from Michael Kimmel, like The Guide to Feminism, or his TED Talk. Books from Tony Porter about the man box. Books from Bell Hooks as well, like The Will to Change. Or the little short essay from Chimamanda, We Should All Be Feminists. Learn about it, read about it, share it with your friends. That's the first step, self-awareness. Then we need to have this conversation mainstream in the media. We need to have more books about it, more movies, more ads, more magazines, more songs, more TV shows talking about that topic. Then we need to get inspired by the work of different organizations. So for example, there's Abad in Lebanon, which is working on challenging the traditional notion of masculinity with a specific men center offering different counseling sessions to men in Lebanon, or training workshops on redefining and bringing positive images of manhood. Also, the association Men Engage is working to gather NGOs all around the world, working to support men and boys fighting for more gender equity. There's the campaign, which is called Men Care, portraying different images of men. Men caring and fathers, daughters, sons, which actually is changing the image we have of fatherhood. There's this campaign from Promunda, working on those men as caregivers, and these photo shoots from Getty Images as well, portraying a new kind of dad visually. So different initiatives around the world are working in that field. We also need to develop nonviolent parenting. We need to let our kids play with whatever they like. It doesn't matter. and to be careful about the expressions we use with them when they're kids. No? Don't play with this like a girl, man up. All these expressions are already shaping our kids. And we need to teach these topics in our schools. Just think about Duke University, which recently introduced a class specifically on toxic masculinity. So we need in our universities to have this conversation with our men and with our women. We need to teach in a young age emotional literacy, self-awareness to our boys, to develop their empathy, to develop their non-violent communication skills, to build the men of the future. We also need to have more positive role models. Men like Obama or Trudeau who are openly feminists. Men who stand up and raise their voice to show that you can be a caring, loving father and also a strong political figure. So we need a global movement. We need a he for he movement. Because at the end of the day, now we have many organizations working to empower women, many gender projects and associations working to develop women leadership skills, but who is actually developing emotional literacy in our men? Who is actually shaping the new face of masculinity? So, deep down, I believe that our men are loving. Our men are caring. We need to build a world which allows them to feel fully themselves. Because at the end of the day, emotions have no gender.